Today, we welcome to Global Citizenship Education interview series, Charles Hopkins. Charles Hopkins holds the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education towards Sustainability at York University in Toronto, Canada. This chair, established in 1999, was the first to focus on education for sustainable development, ESD, as a central concept to quality education and to position sustainability as a purpose of education. Today, ESD is recognized as a key enabler in the pursuit of sustainable development. Hopkins coordinates two global ESD research networks, the International Network of Teacher Education Institutions and the Indigenous ESD. The first network is comprised of teacher education institutions spanning 50 countries and focuses on enhancing ESD in pre-service and in-service teacher training. The second network, covering 40 countries, aims to embed sustainability in curricula to improve the education of Indigenous youth. Internationally, Hopkins has a long relationship with education and sustainability, chairing the writing and adoption processes of several UNESCO ESD declarations. As a part of the UN preparation for the Rio Summit in Rio de Janeiro, in 1992, Hopkins was one of the drafters of the Chapter 36 of Agenda 21, Education, Public Awareness and Training. Hopkins has been a part of UNESCO's efforts to develop education for sustainable development and also chaired the writing process of the Bonn Declaration on ESD 2009 and the Aichi Nagoya Declaration on ESD 2014. An awarded education leader with 3 honorary doctorates for his achievements, Hopkins has lectured and presented papers in more than 75 countries. His leadership experience includes position as a regional school superintendent, as a superintendent of curriculum with Canada's largest school board, and as well as leadership roles in the not-for-profit sector. Hopkins also served as a co-director of the Asia-Pacific Institute on ESD in Beijing, China. So, Charles, a rich, diverse background. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, a Global Citizenship Education interview series.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I apologize for the long introduction. It's a matter of longevity, I think.
Yeah, that was a wonderful background, and I was really impressed about the diversity of your experiences, and then it tells a lot about your precious contribution to the field. And so thank you very much once again, Charles.
Thank you.
I want to jump straight into our conversation with I would say straightforward question. And the question is, in your opinion, what is a global citizenship education, and how would you define a global citizen?
Well, as you can tell, even though you read that long introduction, global citizenship education did not come up.
Right.
I'm not really a scholar in this field, but I certainly have perceptions of it, and I include it when I'm dealing with education for sustainable development. I see them as extremely complementary and so on. Let me take it almost in reverse. Let me talk about a global citizen. I think global citizens are concerned with and willing to act. It's the two things: to act in the big picture, understanding and addressing the realities of what is happening beyond the local, and in a context of past, the present, and the future. So it's that sort of is the picture I have in mind. I have not written to define in any way. I would never, sort of go that way. But I have lectured a bit on global citizenship education. And what I try to do is I look at global citizenship education as the enabler, the builder of global citizens. So that means Global citizenship education, it develops the appetite to want to become a global citizen, and it helps them find accurate information. It develops the perspectives and values to interpret that knowledge and information that you find out there. You know, it has to be put in context, etc. Global citizenship education helps to acquire the skills to both listen and to engage, you know, building compassion and solidarity with others. And really an important aspect is it builds the skill sets to take informed, effective action as a citizen. So those are the attributes I think of when I refer to global citizenship education.
Yeah, very interesting. The action part is very interesting. I want to also ask you a question related to education for sustainable development. You mentioned that you like to think of global citizenship education as an umbrella term, and of course, there is always discussion on the relationship, for example, between global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and so forth. How do you see the two platforms connecting each other, ESD and GC?
Yeah. Well, I don't see one being umbrellaed under the other. You know, you always, it's whatever you start with as the concept, everything else is under it.
Yeah.
So if I start if I start with the concept of wheel, then an automobile wheel is one subset. But if I think of to start with automobile, then the wheel is a subset, right? So it doesn't, I don't look at one being under any other umbrella. I see them as complementary. Education for sustainable development does not have so much about developing the skills to actively engage and become and taking part as a citizen.
Right.
Okay. Education for sustainable development, there were 4 parts that we added, we built into it. If you want, we can talk a little bit more later about Rio and when we were coming up with the concept of education for sustainable development. First of all, ESD is simply a purpose of all education. It's not a subject. It's not what we call an adjectival subject, you know, like peace education, environmental education, driver education, anti-drug education, sexual education, all of those things. Okay?
Right.
Education itself for sustainable development is really what we're looking at. And so it gives the knowledge and skills, the background into social, environmental, and economic issues and so on. But at the heart of education for sustainable development is actually access and retention in quality education. We won't have any development without an educated public. So that is a concept that was never a part of global citizenship.
Right.
You know, so the two of them work very nicely together. They become much more of a useful, holistic approach to building a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. How would you, in a way, describe 2 or 3 core themes as they relate to education for sustainable development? And then attached to this question, I also want to ask you a question that all my guests here would consider very interesting. And the question is how concepts of ESD, global citizenship, potentially relate to your personal life journey.
Well, in the beginning of this, what are the aspects? As I said, the one aspect is access and retention in quality education, and we can have all kinds of discussions about what is a quality education. Education that does not address the future of people and the planet is not, in my eyes, a quality education.
And I agree. Absolutely.
Now, we can get into what are the issues that are out there, and certainly climate change is a huge one. Is that an environmental issue? Only in a current context of many people, but it is, if you are displaced because of climate change, with drought, flood, or whatever, it rapidly becomes a social issue, especially you are forced to migrate to a different country. The people who are crossing the Mediterranean right now on life rafts and so on, for them, it is an economic issue. It is a social issue. It is an environmental issue that has forced them into it. And their life in the future is one that is complex. It's not ESD, it's not global citizenship, education, etc. But these are attributes that must be within the receiving population as well as within them. Okay, so that's sort of how I look at it.
Absolutely.
If you think about my own personal journey, because of my age, this could take several weeks. But I began my journey in sort of a rural area and in northern Canada, and heavily involved in the environment, which I think set the foundation for care and concern, a love of the natural environment. But then, as later in my teen years, I joined the Navy and traveled to Latin America and Central America, so on. And it whet my appetite as a very young person for a global perspective. And when I became a teacher, I went back to teaching about the environment in natural science and so on, and became sort of a pioneer educator in what was then called in the very late 1950s, early 1960s as outdoor education, education in the environment, experiential education, etc. I go back to that far, that when the concern was that it wasn't simply education in the out of doors, but it should be education for the environment and the birth of environmental education. And I was part of all of that. And then the big life changer was Rio. I was involved as one of a team of about 10 people who were to explore and write the chapter in the first global implementation plan for sustainable development. It was called Agenda 21. Currently now we have the 2030 agenda for the 17 sustainable development goals. Well, that's the third implementation plan. The first was Agenda 21, then the Millennium Development Goals, and then we went on to currently. But at any rate, in trying to figure out what was the role of education, we came up with four things. The first one was access and retention in quality education. But the second one was recognizing it was our most educated countries that were leaving some of the deepest ecological footprints and creating through colonization and so on, a lot of the social injustices, etc. So the second goal then was to reorient the purpose of education and then avoid trying to come up with sustainability education, because that just becomes another in a long list of what we called adjectival educations. The third one was the public awareness and understanding, because we realized that countries could not move, democratic countries at any rate, could not move without the support of the general public. So there was, I don't know about other countries, but in my country, often we think that the main goal of government is not good governance, but staying
In Canada.
Yeah. So, so the public awareness and understanding and support, not only for the public sector, for government, but for the private sector, so that people would knowledgeably select what they were going to purchase. And to understand, where was it made, fair trade, what is the ecological footprint of the product, need versus greed, all those kinds of things. And then the fourth aspect was training, where we do know how to do things better, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, sewage treatment plants, or whatever, teaching, for instance. How do we train the professionals that are there and train the new people entering into the workforce? So those were sort of the four aspects of education for sustainable development. So if you see global citizenship as giving them the willingness to engage, the compassion, the solidarity, as well as the skills to effectively engage. That's another one that really struck me, of course, was after Rio, I became superintendent of curriculum for, say, Canada's largest school board. So suddenly you're back in the situation where it's not just about global citizenship education.
Right.
It's about addressing the core skills that get measured all the time. The one, mathematics, language, and so on. How do you develop that? But at the same time, how do we build the soft skills that include global citizenship, that include relationships, not only in your own community, but globally? How do we develop a solidarity with others, where others are not necessarily limited to humans? It could be all life forms.
Absolutely.
So how do we build that in to the very foundation, not making it an option at university that a handful of people, nicely take, but how is that built into education at all levels?
Absolutely. Do you think there is a lack of values in nowadays higher education in more general? I feel that skills are really emphasized, much less so values. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it depends on the culture. In some countries, they look at this as values are at the heart of it. And in other countries, they do not want education systems addressing values whatsoever. They say values are the parents' responsibility. And whether they bring them through their own modeling or through religious practices or whatever. But I think no matter how it is there, values are formed. And whether you can actually develop values, or do you bring them forward? Do you put them in situations where students choose, and so on? And of course, what do the education systems themselves model? Because often values are picked up just from your surroundings. Who you are with, what you hear, what you see, from the informal education that goes on, let alone what you pick up from the hidden curriculum, that which is not really addressed, but you better be aware of.
Absolutely. What are 2 or 3 values that you consider core or important when it comes to discussions around ESD and global citizenship?
I think seeking the truth, pushing forward and seeking the truth. A second one is a shift from self-centeredness to compassion for others. And that's very difficult because most of our school systems are geared towards the individual become all they can be. You know, the role of the teacher is to nurture the student to become all they can be. I think the shift is coming as we're looking at education also as a common good. That we must move beyond the individual, from me to we. The idea of a future that is plural. We talk about futures because we don't want to come up with any one, right? But that is full of caring and compassion, not just for others presently, but for future generations. This must be of great concern, and that's a very, very different way of looking at it, especially in those countries where, in higher education, people pay tuition fees that are
high tuition fees
and so on, and they expect the return on their tuition to really enable them to live as well as possible.
Yeah.
Another value I think that would be extremely important is exploring the concept of well-being. What does well-being really mean beyond well-off? The concept of well-being, bringing meaningfulness to one's life, the soft skills of being able to relate to other people,
right?
To being able to cope with what you won in the birth lottery, male, female. Where were you born? What's the color of your skin? Who are your parents? What kind of a setting were you born into? Was there a school nearby? Was there a good school nearby that you could go to for free? All of these kinds of things that are determined in your birth lottery, you must deal with. And these are all things that are not overtly dealt with in schooling today.
And so do you think that nowadays higher education institutions and institutions more in general are so interested in students' life journeys, or they are much more interested in their skill sets?
I think they're much more interested in skill sets because that's what parents at the moment want.
Right.
And students themselves. So this kind of a concept of educating for the futures is simply at the discussion level. But the thing I feel, and why I pour my life into it, is that we need to address this as quickly as we can, because every day that goes on, it makes it harder to change.
Yes, it's a sort of a vicious circle, isn't it?
So at least let's discuss it. Let's get it out in the open. And I'm so pleased that UNESCO, about every 25 years or so, they hold major reflection on the purpose of education. We had Dolores report in 1996. That was the last one where we looked at the purpose of education being to know, to do, to be, and to live together. And now we're looking at it again in a whole process called the Futures of Education. And in that's where the idea of education also being a common good. And that is an important shift. So not only all you can be, but what others can be.
Absolutely.
Without you being your achievement limiting that of others.
Very interesting. And so we are heading towards the end of this very interesting conversation. A couple of more questions. The first one is, could you discuss a little bit about the significant work you're engaged in as the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education towards sustainability at York University? I think this will be very interesting to our audience here.
Right. Well, I think you mentioned that we have two research networks. One is looking at how we can reorient teacher education to address sustainability.
Yeah.
It's the United Nations pointed out that education for sustainable development was the key enabler of all of the sustainable development goals, and that education needs to be involved. However, the world's teachers, 2/3 of them feel that they do not have the background to actually be able to do it. So we're looking into how we can engage that. The second one is how can education for sustainable development, both the not only the topic but the methodology and so on, how could that help to improve the education of the least well-served people in the world? That is the world's well-served by their education system, and that is the world's indigenous people. So that is another one that we are working on. I had with colleagues in 18 different countries, the high-scoring PISA countries, the OECD measures how well education systems do in math, language, and science every so often. And we went into those high-scoring countries and found school systems that embedded ESD in what they were doing, to see if ESD was a choice that you had to make to give up your PISA, or could you work on ESD, or could you do both? And when the research showed that doing both actually rounded out the education and improved it overall. So we thought, if it works for these lucky people, could we use the same concepts and work with the world's indigenous people? And so that's the other big network in about 50 countries, and it is nicely working there. And then the other work that we're working on is, how do you localize the SDGs into something that's locally relevant, meaningful, culturally appropriate, and actually have movement at the local level. The negotiations around climate change and so on between countries moves at a glacial speed, and unfortunately the glaciers are retreating. They aren't even
unfortunately
even, so. But at the local level, it's not about negotiations, because you're not giving up anything for someone else. You're simply improving yourself. It is a whole different concept. So we spent a fair bit of time working with something called Regional Centers of Expertise in ESD. It's a United Nations university program in about 175 major cities and regions around the world, as to how to localize sustainability action and what is the role of education, public awareness, understanding, and training in doing this. So Absolutely. Those are some of the significant things that we're working on now.
Very interesting. And I guess this then will develop into possible publications. Is there any specific forthcoming publication that you like to briefly mention in our conversation?
Yeah, there are a number of publications that are out there, but one of the ones that we're working on now that'll soon be published through UNESCO is on the kind of leadership that is needed to try and do this, because so much of what we're trying to do is pioneering. It's breakthrough. It's not as though we have a clear vision of where we're going. I use the metaphor that so often we're driving the sustainability bus by looking in the rear view mirror. We see what we must get away from, but we can't picture where we're going. So the kind of leadership that can deal with that kind of duality, that can engage people to voluntarily come together. Education is not like the private sector. It is about building a feeling of togetherness, solidarity, helping, and urging people to move forward with something that they haven't been trained in and is not a formal part yet of the curriculum. It's a very complex thing. So that kind of leadership is yet to be explored.
Absolutely. Very interesting discussion. And lastly, I want to ask you a challenging question. And the question is, if you can provide a definition of ESD and global citizenship using 3 keywords and explain why you are choosing these 3 keywords.
Well, the first one is solidarity.
Solidarity.
Yeah. And I would say others. With solidarity with others. And where the others, say, is not limited to humans.
Humans and non-humans. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a difference. So the 3 would be solidarity with others. And if we had to add another one in it, I think it would have to do with acting. Action of some sort. Engagement maybe would be a better so solidarity, engagement, others.
Excellent. So very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Charles. It's a real pleasure to know your perspectives on ESD, global citizenship, the precious activities that you are advancing as the chair at York University. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you for the opportunity.